All right, welcome to this explainer. Today we're unpacking a truly radical and honestly highly synthesizing piece of writing by an author named Zhu Feng. It's titled Escaping Suffering. Now, this text is fascinating because it basically pulls together a massive array of spiritual teachings. We're talking Jesus, Buddha, Laozi, Muhammad, all woven together with observations of nature to present this highly uncompromising thesis. So the core argument we'll be exploring today is Zhu Feng's proposition that human suffering is entirely self-inflicted. Yeah, it's a bold, definitely controversial stance, but we're going to break down exactly how this philosophical framework is built, step by step, and look at what it really means for how we view our own lives.
Okay, let's dive into this. The foundational quote of the entire text is simply this: "The suffering of humanity originates from humanity itself." Now, that is an incredibly uncompromising hook, isn't it? It immediately challenges that almost universal, deeply ingrained instinct we all have to look outward when we're in pain. To blame external forces, or bad luck, or just other people. But instead, Zhu Feng posits a universe governed by strict logic and order, where the operation of the Tao, or the way of the universe, reflects perfect fairness. And the text argues that failing to recognize this inward origin of our suffering is exactly what keeps us trapped in a perpetual vicious cycle.
So this brings us to the major agitation point of the essay. And look, the author openly acknowledges that telling someone who is currently suffering that their pain is self-inflicted, well, it sounds incredibly cruel. The text notes that it would be so much easier to just blame heaven's blindness or social injustice, authoritarian governments, or even just the malice of others. But making these self-comforting excuses is compared to drinking anesthetic poison. Indulging in these excuses just reduces us to irrationality. The harsh reality presented here is that today is merely a continuation of yesterday, and this life is a continuation of past actions. Basically, to heal, the text insists we absolutely have to stop drinking the poison of external blame.
And this brilliantly illustrates the philosophical principle anchoring Feng's entire argument. Internal causes are fundamental. External causes act through internal causes. This concept is used to explain how past personal actions, which are the internal causes, actually manifest as our present external circumstances. It's essentially a strict mechanism of cause and effect. So, what we often perceive as a completely random external event just acting upon us out of nowhere is, within this framework, merely the external environment reacting to the seeds we've internally sown in our own past.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how the text applies this philosophy to some highly provocative real-world examples. It contrasts apparent external causes, things like being hit by a careless cyclist, contracting an illness, or facing harsh laws, with underlying internal causes. So the text views even these seemingly random accidents or systemic issues as karmic outcomes that are ultimately self-invited or self-inflicted. While the surface might look exactly like an external violation, the deep reality is argued to be a manifestation of one's own doing. It's a deeply challenging perspective for sure, because it forces total, absolute personal responsibility onto each of us.
This brings us into what we can kind of call the aggressive interrogation phase of the text. The author asks us to pose this precise question to ourselves: what qualifications do I have to enjoy a beautiful environment and life? Let that sink in for a second. It's a question specifically designed to abruptly halt our sense of entitlement.
Building on that, the text immediately asks, what kind of life do I deserve? The rhythmic pacing of these questions is totally intentional here. Zhu Feng is forcing us to look inward. Because, we can easily find 10,000 reasons to blame society or to blame heaven and earth for our current lot in life. But the author counters with, why not look inward to find just one single reason to blame ourselves? If we've been reckless in the past, do we genuinely deserve a life of abundance today?
And this really highlights the strict karmic logic operating in the author's worldview. If we have never contributed to society, well, we shouldn't expect to enjoy the contributions of others. And if we lack honesty, we have no grounds to condemn the dishonesty of others. The text uses a really grounded metaphor here. If you have no savings in the bank, don't fantasize about an easy life. If you sow no seeds in the spring, do not expect a bountiful harvest in the autumn. Your current circumstances are literally just the math of your past actions adding up.
So, if we accept this premise, what behaviors do we actually need to avoid? The text outlines several actions that it claims will only deepen our suffering. And beyond the obvious crimes like cheating, stealing, bribing, or embezzling, the author specifically targets resentment, complaining, cursing the government or heaven, stirring up trouble, and relying on or flattering power. These are all framed as deeply counterproductive. These dishonest and resentful behaviors don't solve our problems. They merely perpetuate that vicious cycle of misery, creating brand new negative internal causes that will, inevitably, manifest as future suffering down the line.
So, the crucial point is, how do we actually get out of this cycle? Well, Xu offers a step-by-step, almost meditative guide to escaping suffering. Step 1, remain calm, because anxiety only breeds disorder. Step 2, accept your present circumstances equanimously. Step 3, work to change things bit by bit, doing your absolute best, without any regrets. And finally, step 4, accept fate. And the text gives some very stark examples here. Say you've done your best and there's literally no food for tomorrow, you must calmly face that. Or if your child gets into university, but you genuinely cannot afford the tuition, despite your best efforts, you must honestly tell them you have done all you can and accept that fate. It is, at its core, a philosophy of radical acceptance.
Now, alongside that radical acceptance, the text prescribes a specific lifestyle, what we can call the path of simplicity. The author advises us to focus solely on giving, without obsessing over our own future. We should create wealth, but never squander resources. And interestingly, Xu explicitly warns against pursuing extraordinary mystical paths to godhood or Buddhahood. Instead, the instruction is simply to walk the path of a regular person. Live a simple, ordinary life and abandon all those fantasies of instant fame or supernatural escape. The escape from suffering, paradoxically, is found right in the humble, everyday act of living and contributing.
Ultimately, the essay culminates in a specific triad. How do we ensure we finally break free from this suffering? Well, by adopting a definitive attitude of reverence. The text instructs us to revere the greatest creator, revere life, and revere nature. By aligning ourselves with this triad, the author posits that a person harmonizes with the strict logic and order of the Tao that we discussed at the very beginning. And doing that ensures the vicious cycle is permanently broken.
We'll end today's explainer with this final, highly provocative thought directly from the text. Death is not the end of life. If we do not fear death, what else is there to fear? It's a really powerful summary of Xu unyielding perspective on mortality and total acceptance. Think about it. If suffering is self-created, and if the ultimate worst-case scenario, death, is simply a transition rather than a hard end, then fear itself becomes completely obsolete. It leaves us to contemplate something pretty profound. If we truly strip away our excuses and our fear of the end, how dramatically would the way we live our lives today have to change?